If you've had a horrendous growing season, then you are not alone. Here in Suffolk, we are officially in drought. We've had the least amount of rain since 1856. Cornflowers, normally a staple in the garden the entire summer, have not been able to cope. Dahlias have shriveled up and died. The beans have not been able to get a grip at all. And the radishes have just swollen and got fat and woody. And now it's September. So the growing season's over, right? Not at all. One of the biggest mistakes that I used to make was to see autumn as the shutdown season ready for winter. But actually, if you put in some work now, you can make food last all winter and start next season with some thriving crops ready to go. Before we get onto the meaty stuff, just remember that I am in zone 8, so your growing conditions will depend on where you live in the world. And if you enjoy the video and you find some use from it, please consider buying a virtual coffee from the link in the description. So really there are 3 key things to bear in mind when it comes to growing at this time of year. And that is light, heat, and frost tolerance. In spring, all of these things are improving. So the levels of light are lengthening, the level of heat is increasing, and the risk of a frost is diminishing. So your plants are on the up. At this time of year, it's all going backwards. So you are a little bit on a race against the clock. Now in previous years, I have started my seeds too late. So once we've hit late autumn, winter, my plants are only small. Now if they're protected, they're fine, but what you've got to remember is they don't grow a lot, which means they are way more vulnerable to attacks of pests, frost, and they just don't bounce back. So last year, for example, I had a polytunnel full of about 400 to 500 tiny lettuces. Well, it only took a small army of voles to come and bite the stem of every single tiny seedling to take out my entire crop. So with that being said, now September is the time to get sowing. So leafy greens are one place to start. Things like chard, kale, lettuces, and spinach. You can see here that my kale absolutely got destroyed this year, not by cabbage white butterflies, because actually the drought seems to have put those off, but flea beetles ravaged everything. Kale germinates really quickly at this time of year. Within a week you'll have small plants like this, and then you can grow them up, pot them on, and then I would say by the end of September, beginning of October, when the pests are kind of starting to die down, pop them out into the garden. Spinach too is a fantastic crop to start at this time of year. It will grow a little bit and you might get a harvest of it this side of Christmas, but then when the warmer weather hits in the spring, it will really start to thrive. I've started some spinach here, but my dog was playing with the ball yesterday and knocked this entire container on the floor, so I'm going to have to start again. Chard also does really well outside, and like kale is really frost tolerant, and in actual fact with the kale the frost actually makes it become sweeter. And lettuces I start now, but I do tend to move them into the polytunnel, although this year I'm going to be growing them bigger before I transplant them. There are also some great root crops to start at this time of year. Radish germinates within days, gets to maturity within 1 month during the peak growing season, and you can sow it all year round, especially if you've got some cover to put it under. I'm also growing a few turnips, purple top Milan and snowball. Again, they germinate relatively quickly. They can be saved from the frost because they're in the ground, and a little bit of fleece or cover will help them progress immensely. And then carrots are actually a really great winter crop. Although they won't grow through the winter, if you sow them up to the middle of September, especially under cover, so in a greenhouse, under a cloche or in a polytunnel, they will start to grow, and they'll quite happily sit in the ground when it's cold, and then on those warmer days and as soon as spring arrives, they will start to bound away for a nice early crop. It's all too easy sometimes to forget to actually take a seat and stop what you're doing and just enjoy life, enjoy the moment. And it's a beautiful day here, so I've decided just to stop, watch the breeze through the trees, the clouds in the sky. There's little chickens bopping about. Margaret's flopped down by the pigsty. And of course, wherever I am, Dora is not too far away. It's also good to use this time as thinking time. So I tend to think about what I want to film to show you guys and what I need to do on the farm, all the jobs coming up, Obviously we are now into September, and that means we're heading to autumn and then winter, so there's actually a hell of a lot of work to do. In the garden, for example, there's not only planting biennials and hardy annuals now for early crops next year, there's also ordering. So ordering bulbs, ranunculus, anemones, glads and things that I need to think about, especially with those first two, ranunculus and anemones, that I need to think about planting some in the polytunnel for an early crop and then some outside. Then there's all the infrastructure stuff that I need to do over the winter, a lot of which is fencing and things that I talked about in the rewilding video before. And then of course, in only 6 to 8 weeks, it's time to get the sheep pregnant. So time flies. And talking of ordering those ranunculus, there are flower farm jobs to be doing now too. Remember those cornflowers that I showed you at the beginning of the video? Well, now is the perfect time to start them for next year. Sow them now, give them a little bit of protection over the winter, and they will come into a nice early flush of flowers before you start sowing your next season seeds. Ranunculus and anemones are also great to start now. I'm going to split them this year between planting some outside just under a low cloche so they get quite a bit of cold, and putting some in the polytunnel where they're more protected, and I'm hoping that will give me a 2-phase flowering period. And then biennials as well, so foxgloves, hesperus, sweet williams, all those type of things. If you start them now, grow them into little plugs, overwinter them, then they will give you some marvellous flowers next spring. Now I'm pretty lucky to have a polytunnel to grow in, like I said, over the winter to give stuff shelter. But you do not need anything this large. Before we had the polytunnel here on site, I just used offcuts of bits of plastic and bits of random frame to make cloches to go over the top of plants. Did it look pretty? No, it didn't. But did it work? Yes, it did its job. It seems mad that I always used to think as autumn as shutdown season, when in fact, actually now is the time to really get your next year garden going. So I hope that's been a little bit of help, maybe a little bit of inspiration, just to get some seeds in now and get a head start on next year's gardening with some lovely food and a few flowers too. And if you're going to grow beautiful ranunculus blooms, check out this video, which is full of the mistakes that I made when I first grew them.